the Democratic caucus is their whip, but also his longevity here and history provides a very good context for where we're headed. And with that, I'll make a statement that without objection, any written statements you have will be made part of the record. And with that, Mr. Hoyer, we welcome you here to the subcommittee and look forward to hearing your testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. And Chairman Sessions, thank you for your comments. I appreciate your holding this hearing today. While I recognize that there is a specific recommendation, you were able to get that, I'm sure. Wouldn't want to miss that that opening about. I miss Mr. Byrne and Ms. Newhouse, and Ms. Cheney is probably here as well somewhere. In any event, Mr. Chairman, when Republicans banned congressionally directed spending in 2011, they did so by changing their conference rules, as you know, not by altering the rules of the House. I'm curious whether it is the subcommittee's intention, therefore, to explore whether to recommend a change to the Republican conference rules or to the House rules themselves. No matter what the Congress does on earmarks, it ought to be done in a bipartisan way. I think all of us agree on that. I've long been, as the press knows, my constituents know, a proponent of congressionally directed spending for reasons I will get to shortly. We call that earmarks, for lack of a better term. However, it is clear in the past the system was abused. When Democrats took the majority in 2007, as you know, we engaged in a serious earmark reform process that introduced transparency and accountability. We changed the rules so that the public could see every item of congressionally directed spending, who the sponsor was, and whether it had been dropped into a bill in conference without prior consideration, which is, I think, what you mentioned, Mr. Chairman. Moreover, we required every member requesting an earmark to certify that he or she had no financial interest in the request. Later, we made the system even more transparent by requiring all members to post earmark requests and justifications on their websites when they ask for them. Now, all of us understand if we had earmarks, you would want to get some earmarks, and you wouldn't get all of them. So there was going to be some controversy as why'd you get one and not the other. But we thought it absolutely essential that the public have a full, clear, transparent understanding of who was asking, what they were asking for. We introduced new restrictions blocking earmarks benefiting for-profit entities as opposed to public entities. As a matter of fact, I was the majority leader at this point in time, and a number of these proposals were put forward by Mr. Obey and myself, and Ms. Slaughter was very helpful in that effort. We engaged, I believe, in a very successful reform of the earmark process that addressed the problems of the past and made it much easier to game the system. When Republicans came into the majority in 2011, however, there was an eagerness to win a victory, in my opinion, in the realm of congressional reform. What was chosen, in my view, was not reform, but it eliminated earmarks altogether. And that, of course, was the low-hanging fruit. Now, just as we saw the consequences of an unchecked system in the past, we've now seen also the unintended consequences of eliminating congressionally directed spending altogether. The chairman mentioned one of those consequences is that now, frankly, if you have a need in your district, and we ought to know our districts better than anybody else, and certainly better than anybody else in the bureaucracy or the administration, we have to go hat in hand to the administration. A co-equal branch of the government has to go hat in hand. The Constitution has been pointed out in Article 1, Section 9, Paragraph 7, gives us that responsibility and duty, and does not give that to the administration. So we've seen the consequences of an unchecked system, but we've also seen a consequence of a system which precludes, even transparently, the pursuit of us adding funding for our districts, which we think are important for our districts from a public perspective. Again, we eliminated private sector, which we think is appropriate. President Trump, in my opinion, wasn't wrong when he said that earmarks used to help bring both parties together to reach compromise on legislation. But more than that, they recognize that members of Congress individually, as I have just said, know their districts better than anyone at the federal agencies and better than the Appropriations Committee as a whole. The Houston Chronicle pointed out this in an editorial last Friday when it lamented the difficulties the city's representatives have had trying to get specific appropriations for flood cleanup and rebuilding efforts. I quote from the Houston Chronicle, "Without the ability to write line-item expenditures, our local delegation and city advocates have been forced to craft legislative language that, they hope, will instruct executive agencies to prioritize Houston flood infrastructure." In other words, doing indirectly what we say you cannot do directly. That becomes then, therefore, less transparent, less open, and less available for the public review. But without specific directed spending, it is ultimately up to the executive branch, which everybody has noted, in Washington to decide which projects get funding. Let me suggest that also has another perverse. It estranges us further from our districts. And therefore, undermines the confidence the American people have is in that we are paying attention to them, to a school need, to a bridge need, to a street need, to a dredging need, to a sewer correction need, whatever that need may be. If the public doesn't think that their representative in Congress, to whom they send a lot of money to Washington, cannot apply any of that money to needs that they see immediately in their district, that, in my opinion, undermines the sense that democracy works for them. We've seen unintended shift in decision-making away from the legislative branch to the executive one. That is contrary, in my opinion, to Article 1 of the Constitution, which clearly invests us with that responsibility and that authority. So I believe that we should take action to reinstate the use of the authority given to Congress under Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7, to direct spending in the way the Congress deems appropriate. Now, let me repeat that. The Congress deems appropriate. If you make these transparent, then it will be the Congress and the American public who will consider this, not just an individual. And this will have to, therefore, be approved not just by the individual that asks for such directed spending, but by the Congress itself, by the representatives of the American people, and they will judge the merits of these programs, which I think is ultimately the protection the public needs and wants. Our reforms are, it should be noted, still the rules of the House. The reforms I've talked about in terms of transparency, of being put on your website, put it on the committee's website when they give it approval to an earmark, so that the public at each stage of the process and other members will have the opportunity to know what is being asked for and what is being approved. I thank the chairman and ranking member for this opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering the subcommittee's questions. And let me end with what I've told a number of people on both sides of the aisle. If a proposal moves forward like this, it is my intention to recommend to my members that it be supported. Thank you. Thank you,
Ms. Roy. I think one of the things that you brought out, and I just have I was sitting here thinking about this and I was writing a question, and this is an issue that affects both the Republican